All right, guys, welcome to the video for college football week 2. And of course, this is the 2022 season. My name is Brock Page, and I've been doing sports picks for free right here on YouTube since 2016. And if you want to see which one of these free picks on this video that I'm actually betting on personally, there's only one way to do that, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. And the link for my website is in the description section below. The link for those picks is in the description section below. With that, guys, let's go ahead and dive into it. We're going to take a look at Louisville taking on UCF. And that'll be a 7:30 Eastern kickoff on Friday, September 9th, 2022. The Central Florida Knights are -7, total 61.5. Now, the Knights were relatively untested in their Week 1 blowout of South Carolina State. They're taking on a Louisville team who definitely took their lumps last week themselves, but it wasn't a conference matchup against a tough Syracuse team on the road. Not easy playing in that Carrier Dome. And even though the Cardinals struggled with turnovers offensively, Tyler Hudson managed to haul in 8 catches for 102 yards. Now, defensively on the other side of the football, D lineman Ashton Gelati had a pair of sacks on the day. When it comes to the total, I don't see the Cards lighting up the scoreboard in this one. Their Week 1 loss also fell 17 points below the posted total. But I am going to lean toward Louisville +7, keeping this one close, and the under 61.5. Next game, Boise State taking on New Mexico, 9 o'clock Friday night. Boise State's -17, totals 44.5. Now, the Broncos had a real rough opener against Oregon State. They lost 34-17, and they allowed 470 yards of total offense. Now, they're taking on a New Mexico squad who put up 41 points in their cakewalk opener, and they rushed for nearly 270 on the ground. Now, defensively, the Lobos had 3 sacks and an interception. And when it comes to the total, New Mexico's opener did fall under the number. Matter of fact, these guys went 7-1 to the under in their last 8 ball games dating back to last season. Meanwhile, the Broncos on the other side saw their last 8 straight all fall under themselves. Give me New Mexico +17, keeping this one close, under 44.5. Next matchup, Alabama taking on Texas, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff on Saturday, September 10th, 2022, my birthday. Alabama's -21, total 64.5. Now, when it comes to the total in this one, 7 out of Texas's last 9 ball games fell under the number, and of course, that dates back to last season. Meanwhile, Alabama went 6-3 to the under in their last 9 themselves. And if you want to see who I think is going to cover this number in this one, this game's being featured as one of my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. But as far as making a free pick is concerned, I'm going to lean toward the under 64.5. Next matchup, Arkansas State taking on Ohio State, 12 o'clock Saturday. The Buckeyes are -44, total 68. And as good as the Buckeyes are, this is a huge number to cover. They failed to cover in the season opener against Notre Dame. Matter of fact, these guys have failed to cover in 5 out of their last 7, dating back to last year. They're taking on an Arkansas State team who took care of Grambling in their season opener. They put up 58 points and rushed for nearly 340 on the ground. Now, Johnny Lang carried it 13 times for a $124 and a score. Meanwhile, Brian Snead averaged just about 5 yards a carry and had a touchdown as well. And even if the Red Wolves end up throwing it, they had a 100-yard receiver last week in Champ Flemings. The Wild Out had 7 grabs for a $122 and 1 touchdown. When it comes to the number, Arkansas State did see their opener get over the total. Meanwhile, Ohio State's gone 60% to the over since October 2nd of last year. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas State +44, keeping this one close, and the over 68. Next ball game, Southern Miss taking on Miami, Florida, 12 o'clock East. The Miami Hurricanes are minus 26, totals 55. And the Canes did exactly what they were supposed to do in the opener. They destroyed Bethune-Cookman by the final of 70-13. The Canes racked up over 605 yards of total offense, as Henry Parrish had 108 yards on the ground. Now, Parrish also had 3 scores rushing. Meanwhile, defensively, the Canes had 3 interceptions, including a pick 6. They're taking on a Southern Miss team who allowed over 240 yards rushing last week in an overtime loss to Liberty. Meanwhile, offensively, the Golden Eagles turned it over twice. Now, total-wise, Southern Miss, their opener did fly over the number. They actually saw 4 out of their last 5 dating back to last year get over the total. Meanwhile, the Canes, they will most likely put it over the number themselves. I'm going to lean toward Miami minus 26, over 55. Next matchup, South Carolina taking on Arkansas, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Arkansas is minus 9, totals 53. The Razorbacks took care of Cincinnati in the opener. They put up 31 points against the Bearcats and held them to just 113 yards on the ground. Bumper Poole led the charge with 13 big tackles. Meanwhile, Jalen Catalan and Simeon Blair, they combined for 15 tackles between the two of them. And in addition to an incredibly efficient day from quarterback KJ Jefferson, running back Raheem Sanders rushed for 117 yards and averaged just about 6 yards a carry. Now, Arkansas is taking on a South Carolina team on the other side who allowed 200 yards rushing in their opener themselves. When it comes to offensive production, these guys currently rank 110th in total yards following week 1. Now, when it comes to the scoring, I'm not so confident the Gamecocks will be able to move the football much. Plus, their week 1 victory fell a touchdown below the posted total for that game. Meanwhile, Arkansas on the other side, they saw unders in 4 out of their last 5, dating back to last year. I'm going to lean toward Arkansas minus 9, under 53. Next ball game, Wake Forest taking on Vanderbilt. That's going to be a noontime Eastern kickoff. Wake Forest is minus 10 on the road, total 64. Now, the Deacs put up 44 against VMI in their opening day win. Wake Forest had over 500 yards of total offense, and they were led by quarterback Mitch Griffiths, who completed over 72% of his passes for 288 yards and 3 scores. Now, running-wise, Christian Turner rushed for 100 yards and scored 2 times with his legs. They're taking on a Vandy defense that allowed 31 points to Elon last week. They also failed to cover a 19-point spread in that game. And after 2 contests this year, the Commodore defense, they currently rank 105th in pass defense. Now, total-wise, Vandy's 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. Meanwhile, Wake Forest has the offensive firepower to put this one close to the number themselves. I'm going to lean toward Wake Forest laying the 10 and the over 64. Next ball game, it is going to be Missouri taking on Kansas State, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. The K-State Wildcats are minus 8, totals 57. Now, Kansas State, they are, they were relatively untested in week 1. They plowed through South Dakota, yet they threw for a piddly 95 yards in the win. They're taking on a Missouri team who allowed only 11 total yards of rushing last week in their win against Louisiana Tech. Meanwhile, offense, is that right? That doesn't seem right. I don't think that number's right. But they didn't allow a whole lot of yards rushing. But 11, we'll have to fact check that. That seems a little low. Now, offensively, the Tigers are in the top 5 in rushing themselves. Nathaniel Pete averaged 9 yards a carry and had a touchdown. Meanwhile, Cody Schrader carried it 17 times and averaged over 4 yards a carry himself. Now, on the defensive end, this Missouri pass rush, they had 4 sacks and three interceptions. Total-wise, 3 out of the Tigers' last 4 ball games fell under the number. Meanwhile, K-State saw their opener fall 14 points below the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Missouri +8, under 57. Next game, Western Illinois taking on Minnesota, 12 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, the Gophers ran the ball real well in their opening week shutout win against New Mexico State. The newly repaired Mo Ibrahim had 21 carries for 132 and a couple of scores. Meanwhile, Tanner Morgan, the quarterback, he went a very safe 13 for 19 passing, and he ran it into the end zone twice. Now they're taking on a Western Illinois team who lost by double digits to Ball State in their opener. I'm going to lean toward Minnesota getting the job done against the spread. Next game, Duke, Northwestern, 12 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Northwestern's -9.5, totals 58. And even though the Wildcats shocked Nebraska in Dublin, this is a fairly big number to lay against a tough Duke team. The Blue Devils took care of Temple 30-0 last week and held them to just 179 total yards. Meanwhile, offensively, the Blue Devils really took it to the air. Aside from, not turning it over at all, they threw it for nearly 330 yards. And that's all thanks to Riley Leonard, who completed 80% of his passes. Leonard was officially 24 of 30 for 328 yards and a couple of scores. Meanwhile, defensively, Duke had 7 PDs on the day. And that's certainly bad news for this Wildcat defense on the other side. These guys allowed 355 yards through the air against Nebraska last week. They officially rank 109th in yards allowed in the country. When it comes to the total, the Wildcats saw 3 out of their last 4 ball games get over the number. Of course, that dates back to last year. And in those ball games, Northwestern allowed 36 points per contest defensively. I'm going to lean toward Duke +9.5, keeping this one close, in the over 58. Next matchup, it is going to be Ohio taking on Penn State, 12 o'clock Happy Valley. Penn State's -25, totals 54. Now, this is a pretty big number for the Nittany Lions. They allowed 31 points to Purdue last week and a whole bunch of passing yards. Penn State gave up over 355 yards through the air, and they didn't force any turnovers. Now, offensively, the Lions failed to establish a proper run game. They ran for just 98 yards on the day. They're taking on an Ohio team on the other side who scored 41 points against FAU in an upset win last week. Curtis Rourke completed nearly 80% of his passes for 345 and 4 touchdowns. Meanwhile, running back Shea Bangura touched it 23 times for $114. Now, total-wise, the Bobcats saw their Week 1 contest fly 30 points above the posted number. Meanwhile, Penn State saw their opener fly over the total themselves. Give me the Ohio Bobcats +25 and the over 54. Next ball game, it is going to be North Carolina taking on Georgia State. 12 o'clock Eastern start time. North Carolina's -7, totals 57. Now, the Tar Heels are currently averaging 60 points a game. And they rank in the top 10 in total yards. Drake May is completing 74% of his passes for 646 and 9 touchdowns. The quarterback's also doing a nice job protecting the football. He's yet to throw a pick in 2 games. Meanwhile, defensively, Cedric Gray, he's leading the charge with 19 tackles on the year. They're taking on a Georgia State team who had a disappointing opener themselves. They lost to South Carolina 35-14. They currently rank 108th in yards allowed. Now, total-wise, North Carolina is 2-0 to the over thus far in the year. And dating back to last year, they went 7-2 to the over in their last 9. Give me North Carolina -7, over 57. Next matchup, it is going to be UTSA taking on Army, 12 o'clock East. Texas San Antonio, they are -2, totals 56. But despite being favored, the University of Texas San Antonio may have a problem, defensively against Army. The Roadrunners allowed 37 points in their opener, and they failed to force a turnover. They're facing an Army offense who did a nice job protecting the football in Week 1 themselves. And despite the loss, the Black Knights had 0 turnovers and rushed for 205 yards. Tyrell Robinson gained 135 yards rushing. He also averaged 15 yards a carry. Now, total-wise, Army's last game got over the number. Meanwhile, UTSA saw their last 5 straight all get over the line. Of course, that dates back to last year. Give me Army +2 over 56. Next game, Charleston Southern taking on NC State. 12:30 Eastern kickoff. Now, this game's currently off the board. And even though the Wolfpack came out flat against ECU, they did hold the Pirates to just 20 points in the scare. Now, when it comes to offensive production, wide receiver Thayer Thomas averaged 14.5 yards a catch and scored their lone receiving touchdown. They're taking on a Charleston Southern team who allowed 52 points in their opener. And that was a 14-point loss to Western Carolina. I think the Wolfpack will wake up a little bit and be prepared for a big W. Give me NC State getting the job done against the spread. Next game, South Alabama taking on Central Michigan, 1 o'clock East. CMU's -4.5, totals 59. And even though they lost in Week 1, the Central Michigan Chippewas had little issue moving the football against Oklahoma State. Quarterback Daniel Richardson completed 74% of his passes, and he threw for a staggering 424 yards. His favorite target was Jalen McGaughey, who had 126 yards receiving and a couple of scores. They're taking on a South Alabama team who was relatively untested in their win against Nicholls State last week. When it comes to the total, 6 out of the Jags' last 9 outings got over the number. Meanwhile, Central Michigan saw their opener get 45 points above their posted total. Give me Central Michigan -4.5 over 59. Next ball game, Southern Utah taking on the Utah Runnin' Utes. 1:30 Eastern start time. This game's currently off the board. And even though the Utes lost their opener, well, the Florida Gators are never a slouch, especially in the swamp in the summer. Very hot, unbearable, tough place to play and win. Tight end Brant Queefe, not Queef, Queefe. He had 9 catches for $105 and a touchdown. Meanwhile, workhorse Tavion Thomas had 23 carries for 115 yards and a score. I'm going to lean toward the Utah Utes against the number. Next game, Lafayette taking on Temple, 2 o'clock East. No line set for this game. Now, Temple's coming off a dismal 30-0 loss to Duke in their opener. The Owls completed just 48% of their passes for 114 yards. Their leading rusher also had 16 yards on 8 carries. They're taking on a Lafayette team who shut out Sacred Heart in their opening day win. I think the Leopards should keep this one close. They're probably going to be catching points here. Give me Lafayette getting the job done against the number. Next game, Western Michigan taking on Ball State, 2 o'clock Eastern start time. Western Michigan's -7, totals 52.5. Now, the Broncos failed to cover a 21.5 point spread last week. They were catching 21.5 points against Michigan State. They allowed 35 points in that loss. They also gave up just about 200 yards on the ground in that game. Now, offensively, they're currently 102nd in the nation in offensive yards. They're taking on a Ball State team who had a tough time with Tennessee this past Saturday themselves. Having said that, though, the Cardinals beat the Broncos handily last season by the final of 45-20 on the road. Give me Ball State +7 over 52.5. Next matchup, it is going to be Marshall taking on Notre Dame, 2:30 Eastern start time. Now, Notre Dame's minus 21, totals 51.5. Now, the Irish had a real tough time moving the football in their opener. They lost 21-10 to Ohio State. They gained only 76 yards on the ground. Matter of fact, the Irish leading rusher gained only 28 yards in that contest. They're taking on a Marshall team who steamrolled Norfolk this past Saturday. The Herd scored 55 points and ran for nearly 400 on the ground. Ethan Payne averaged over 11 yards a carry and rushed for over 110 yards. Meanwhile, Kalen LeBourne rushed for 102 yards, scored twice himself. Now, total-wise, Marshall saw 7 out of their last 10 ball games fall under the number. Meanwhile, Notre Dame saw their opener fall 28 points below the posted total. I'm going to lean toward Marshall plus 21, under 51.5. Next matchup I have for you, it is going to be Furman taking on Clemson, 3:30 Eastern start time. Now, this game's currently off the board. Now, Clemson stopped Georgia Tech in the opener, 41-10. Defense looked great. Give me Clemson against the number. I don't care how big it is. Next game, Appalachian State, Texas A&M, 3:30 Eastern start time. The Texas A&M Aggies are minus 18, totals 52 and a hook. Now, the Aggies struggled to run the football in their season opener. They played the children of the poor. Their leading rusher also had 42 yards. That is it. They're taking on an Appy State team who put up 61 points in an overtime loss to UNC. Chase Bryce completed nearly 70% of his passes for 361 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, rushing-wise, Nate Noel ran for $116 and scored twice. The Mountaineers' performance Saturday puts them in the top 3 in the NCAA right now in total yards per game. When it comes to the scoring, Appalachian State's opener with UNC went 67 points above the posted number. I'm going to lean toward Appalachian State plus 18, over 52.5. Next ball game, Tennessee, Pitt, 3:30 p.m. East. The Tennessee Vols are minus 6.5 on the road, total 66. Now, the Vols scored 59 points in a rout against Ball State last week. Hendon Hooker completed 72% of his passes. The offense rushed for 5 total scores. Now, defensively, Aaron Beasley had 8 tackles on the day. Warren Burrell and Christian Charles, they combined for 16 tackles between the two of them. Now, they're taking on a Pitt team who doesn't look crisp on defense. Not only did they fail to cover against West Virginia, their defensive unit ranks 100th in rush yards per game. Now, when it comes to the total, both teams saw their openers get over the line. As a matter of fact, Tennessee's gone 9-1 of the over in their last 10, dating back to last year. Give me Tennessee minus 6.5, over 66. Next game, Washington State taking on Wisconsin, 3:30 p.m. East. The Wisconsin Badgers are minus 17, totals 49 and a hook. Now, in my opinion here, Wisconsin is not the 17-point covering kind of team. They failed to cover in 3 out of their last 4, dating back to last year. And offensively, Graham Mertz threw it only 16 times last week for 219 yards and only 1 score. Now, they're taking on a WAZZU team who definitely got caught with their pants down against Idaho. They weren't ready to play. That happens in college football. A lot of young guys. They got talent. And even though they completely shit the bed against a terrible program, their quarterback Cameron Ward still threw for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, rushing-wise, Nikhil Watson had 117 total yards on the ground and averaged 6.5 yards a carry. When it comes to the number, WAZZU saw their opener fall 22 points below the total. Meanwhile, Wisconsin saw their last 3 straight fall under the line. I'm going to lean toward WAZZU plus 17, under 49.5. Next matchup, Kennesaw State taking on Cincinnati, 3:30 p.m. East. No line for this game. And even though the Bearcats lost their opener, came to a real tough Arkansas squad. Now, offensively, Cincy was still able to move the ball effectively. Ben Bryant threw for, 325 yards and a couple of scores. Wide receiver Tyler Scott averaged over 15 yards per reception. I'm going to lean towards Cincinnati against the spread. Next game, Colorado Air Force, 3:30 p.m. East. Air Force is minus 16.5, totals 45. But even though Air Force looked great in their opener, they did beat the likes of Northern Iowa. Not a great program. They also turned the ball over twice against UNI, and they continue to be no threat throwing the football. They're taking on a Colorado team who definitely had a bad one against TCU last week. That said, though, their D was led by Trevor Woods, who had 8 tackles on the day. Meanwhile, Quinn Perry and Josh Chandler-Shamedu combined for a dozen tackles between the two of them. Total-wise, Air Force did see their over fly 19 points above the posted number. They're also 5-0 to the over in their last 5 dating back to last season. Give me Colorado plus 16.5, keeping this one close, over 45. Next game, Memphis Navy, 3:30 p.m. East. Memphis is minus 6 on the road, totals 51. Now, Memphis took the loss in their opener against Mississippi State. That said, though, they got an incredible effort out of Jalen Allen, who had a dozen tackles and a sack. Meanwhile, Quindell Johnson and Greg Rubin combined for 17 tackles between the two of them. Now, this Memphis D, they also held Mississippi State to just 97 yards on the ground. They're taking on a Navy team who suffered a humiliating loss to Delaware in their opener. The midshipmen scored only 7 points in the loss, and they gave it away 3 times. Now, total-wise, 7 out of Navy's last 9 ball games fell under the number dating back to last year. Meanwhile, Memphis saw 4 out of their last 7 fall under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward Memphis minus 6, under 51. Next game, Maryland-Charlotte, 3:30 p.m. East. The Maryland Terrapins are minus 27, total 65. Now, the Terps beat the Buffalo Bulls 31-10 last week. Talia Tungavaloa threw for nearly 300 yards and completed 71% of his passes. His favorite target was Rakeem Jarrett, who had 6 catches for 110 yards. And rushing-wise, Roman Hembry had 2 touchdowns and 114 yards on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Charlotte team who somehow lost to William and Mary. As a matter of fact, they allowed 41 points in the game, and they're currently 119th in yards allowed per contest. Now, that loss puts William and Mary, puts these guys at 0-2 on the year and 103rd in total offense. Now, scoring-wise, Charlotte saw overs in 5 out of their last 6. Meanwhile, Maryland went 4-1 to the over in their last 5 themselves. Give me Maryland minus 27, over 65. Next contest, Samford with an M taking on UGA. That's Georgia, 4 o'clock Eastern kickoff. This game's currently off the board. Now, the Georgia Bulldogs obliterated Oregon in the opener. They scored 49 total points. Quarterback Stetson Bennett completed 81% of his passes for 368 yards. Now, Kenny McIntosh also had a big day at receiver, 9 catches for 117 yards. Give me Georgia against the number. Next matchup, Akron, Michigan State, 4 o'clock East. The Michigan State Spartans are minus 34.5, totals 56. Now, the Spartans put up 35 points against Western Michigan in the opener, and they rushed for nearly 200 yards. Jalen Burgett touched it 16 times for $120 and a score. Meanwhile, Peyton Thorne had 4 touchdown passes on the day. They're taking on an Akron team who somehow squeaked by a team called St. Francis, PA last week. It actually took the Zips overtime to get the job done in that one. And following that close game, the Zips defense actually finds themselves 106th in the country in total yards allowed. And like I said, that's to a team called St. Francis, PA. I don't even know what that is. Total-wise, Sparty may put this one over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Michigan State minus 34.5 and the over 56. Real quick, guys, like I did last week, this is typically a long video, so I'm going to take my first break. Give me a couple minutes. Got to stretch out the legs. The ass falls asleep a little bit, plus got to get a little swig of water. So give me a couple minutes here, guys. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'll be right back. We got plenty of content left, so give me a sec. I'll see you in a little bit. All right. Okay, thanks for that break, guys. I really appreciate that. Let's get back to business here. Let's go ahead and take a look at Houston squaring off against Texas Tech, 4 o'clock East. The Texas Tech Red Raiders are minus 3, total 65.5. Now, Texas Tech did pretty much what they were supposed to do and pounded Murray State in week 1. They put up 63 points, and they threw for a staggering 472 yards. Loic Fuangi had 110 yards and 2 scores. Meanwhile, Jerand Bradley had 108 receiving yards and a couple of touchdowns as well. They're taking on a Houston squad who was nearly upset by Texas San Antonio in overtime. They gave up 35 points to UTSA and 337 yards passing. I'm going to lean toward Texas Tech minus 3 over 65 and a hook. Next game, UNLV taking on Cal, 4 o'clock East. The Cal Golden Bears are minus 13, totals 49. Now, Cal was fairly untested in their win over UC Davis last week. They're going up against a running Rebel team who certainly likes to air it out. Doug Brumfield threw for 356 yards and 4 touchdowns last week against Idaho State. His favorite target was Ricky White, who had 8 catches for $182 and 2 scores. And even though UNLV was laying 23 big points, they certainly got the job done against the number. Now, total-wise, 6 out of the Rebels' last 7 ball games got over the total. Of course, that dates back to last year. Meanwhile, Cal season opener got over the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward UNLV plus 13 over 49. Next game, Portland State taking on Washington, 4 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, Washington had an easy win and cover last week against Kent State. They were laying 23, and they put up 45 big points against the Golden Flashes. Now, the Huskies threw the ball exceptionally well. Michael Penix Jr. went 26 of 39 for 345 and 4 touchdowns. Wide receivers Jalen McMillan and Rome Odunze combined for over 170 receiving yards between the two of them and 3 scores. I'm going to lean toward Washington getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, Iowa State taking on Iowa, 4 o'clock East. The Iowa Hawkeyes are -3, totals 40 and a hook. And I'll tell you what, this feels like a bit of a trap game. I think we're going to see a lot of overreaction to Iowa's near loss last week to South Dakota State. I think we're going to see a lot of Iowa State Cyclone money. Just keep in mind that the Hawkeyes allowed only 33 yards on the ground in that game and just 87 through the air. This is a stifling defense. Iowa State's going to have a lot of problems moving the football. Now, Joe Evans had a pair of sacks and 4 tackles from the D-line. Meanwhile, Jack Campbell led the charge with 11 tackles on the day. Now, they're taking on an ISU team who failed to cover in their opener against Southeast Missouri State. And if you think about it, this is a Cyclone team who really hasn't covered many spreads lately. Out of their last 8 ball games, they covered the number only twice. Now, total-wise, both schools saw their opening day games fall under the number. I'm going to lean toward Iowa -3, under 40 and a half. Next matchup, Virginia taking on Illinois, 4 o'clock East. Illinois -4.5, totals 57 and a hook. Now, the Illini fell waste to Indiana last week, 23-20. They also have to face quarterback Brennan Armstrong, who had over 350 total yards and scored 3 times. Meanwhile, running back Paris Jones scampered for 104 yards and scored a touchdown as well. When it comes to this Cavalier defense, Nick Jackson had a massive day with 14 tackles. Now, total-wise, both teams saw their openers fall under the line. Give me Virginia +4.5, under 57 and a hook. Next game, Indiana State taking on Purdue, 4 o'clock East. No line posted for this game yet. Now, Purdue played Penn State real tough and realistically should have won that ball game. They did push on the spread depending on where you shopped at, and they threw for a whole bunch of yards. Aiden O'Connell threw for 356 yards in that game. Meanwhile, wide receiver Charlie Jones had a dozen grabs for $153 and a touchdown. Give me Purdue getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, Wagner taking on Rutgers, 4 o'clock Eastern start time. This game's currently off the board. Now, Rutgers beat a tough Boston College team this past weekend, and they covered the number in that one. The Scarlet Knights were led by Christian Ezian, who had double-digit tackles and half a sack. And speaking of sacks, Tyreen Powell had a couple of them, along with 5 tackles. I'm going to lean toward Rutgers getting the job done against the spread. Next matchup, Northern Colorado taking on Wyoming, 4 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Despite a fluky Week 0 loss, the Wyoming Cowboys bounced back in a big way and beat Tulsa in overtime. They actually put up 40 big points on the Golden Hurricane. When it comes to defensive play, Easton Gibbs leads the team in tackles with 17. I'm going to lean toward Wyoming getting the job done against the number. Always wanted to travel to Wyoming and just like stay in the wilderness for like a week. Not like in the wilderness, like in a cabin. It'd be great. Be nice and bored. I'd love to be bored. I live for boredom. Anyway, next game. Nobody's even watching this at the 39-minute mark anyway. So Who cares? Next game, Eastern Kentucky taking on Bowling Green. Thank God there's a quick pick recap. You don't have to listen to this shit. Anyway, Eastern Kentucky taking on Bowling Green, 4 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, Bowling Green got trashed by UCLA and allowed 45 points in the process. They're taking on an Eastern Kentucky team who put up 34 points against Eastern Michigan and covered the point spread against the MAC school. I'm going to lean toward Eastern Kentucky getting the job done against the spread. Next game, Norfolk taking on JMU, 4 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, James Madison took care of Middle Tennessee State last week, 44-7. Quarterback Todd Centeio threw for nearly 300 yards and 6 touchdowns. His favorite target was Chris Thornton, who had a dozen grabs for $155 and 33 scores. Now, rushing-wise, quarterback Centeio also ran it for $110 on the ground, an average 7.9 yards a carry. They're taking on a Norfolk State team who got blasted by Marshall on Saturday, 55-3. Give me James Madison getting the job done against the spread. Next game, Middle Tennessee State taking on Colorado State, 4 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Colorado State's -8, totals 58 and a hook. Now, both teams got blasted in their openers, but it's the Rams who haven't covered a number in a while. Matter of fact, these guys failed to cover in their last 7 straight. They're taking on a Middle Tennessee State team who went 5-3 against the number in their last 8 themselves. And I think they completely underestimated JMU on the road last week in that bad loss. Teldrick Ross led the team with 11 tackles in that opener. Meanwhile, Jordan Ferguson and DeCorian Patterson combined for 16 tackles between the two of them. Now, total-wise, I don't see much offense in this one. Both schools did see their openers fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward Middle Tennessee State +8, keeping this one close, under 58 and a hook. Next game, Alabama State taking on UCLA, 5 o'clock East. This game's off the board. Now, quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson had over 380 total yards and 4 scores. That was in the opener against Bowling Green. And, of course, running back Zach Charbonnet, he carried it 21 times for 111 yards and a touchdown. Give me UCLA against the spread. Next matchup, Kansas, West Virginia, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. WVU is -14 at home, totals 59. But as good as these guys normally are in Morgantown, the Mountaineers have struggled to cover the number here lately. They pushed against the spread in their opener at most shops, and even before that, they failed to cover in 4 out of their previous 5 ball games. Now, this Mountaineer D is going to have to tighten up. They gave up 38 points to the Kenny Picketless Pitt Panthers last week. They're officially 109th in college football in pass yards allowed. Now, they're taking on a Kansas team who did exactly what they were supposed to do against Tennessee Tech. And that big win is going to put these guys at 4-0 against the number in their last 4 games. And, of course, that dates back to last year. Lonnie Phelps had 3 sacks and 7 tackles in the opener. I'm going to lean toward Kansas +14, under 59. Next ball game, it is going to be Old Dominion taking on East Carolina, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. ECU's -13, totals 51.5. Now, the Pirates lost their opener to NC State. They were held to just 20 points in that contest. And after that loss, ECU finds themselves 96 in the country in offensive rushing. They're taking on a gritty ODU defense who had 4 interceptions in their opener against Virginia Tech. And that was a shocking 20-17 win over the Hokies. Now, the Monarchs held Virginia Tech to just 197 yards passing. They were also led by linebacker Jason Henderson, who had 16 tackles on the day. Now, total-wise, both schools saw their openers fall significantly below the posted total. Give me Old Dominion +13, under 51.5. Next game, Holy Cross, Buffalo, 6 o'clock East. This game's currently off the board. And even though the Bulls got dominated by Maryland, they still had a couple of good series on defense. Marcus Fuqua had an interception and 4 tackles from the secondary. Meanwhile, Logic Hudgens and Keyshawn Cobb had 16 total tackles between the two of them. I'm going to lean toward Buffalo covering the point spread. Next game, Robert Morris taking on Miami, Ohio, 6 o'clock East. No line set for this game. Now, Miami covered in 4 out of their last 7 dating back to last year. Eli Blakey had an interception and 9 tackles in the opener. Ryan McWood also leads the D in tackles with 11 of them. They're taking on a Robert Morris team who lost to Dayton this past week. They were held to just 20 points in that loss. I'm going to lean toward Miami, Ohio, getting the job done against the spread. Next matchup, it is going to be Gardner-Webb taking on Coastal Carolina, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. This game's currently off the board. Coastal took care of Army in the opener and put up 38 points. Grayson McCall was an efficient 12 of 17 for 4 total touchdowns. Meanwhile, Reese White and C.J. Beasley combined for over 220 yards rushing on the ground. They're taking on a Gardner-Webb team who played a Division II school last week. I'm going to lean toward Coastal Carolina getting the job done against the spread. All right, next matchup, Southeast Louisiana taking on Florida Atlantic, 6 o'clock East. No line for this game. And even though FAU dropped their contest with Ohio last week, these guys have scored 81 points through 2 ball games. N'Kosi Perry's thrown for 620 yards already, along with 6 touchdowns and no interceptions. Now, wideouts Jamal Erdrine and Jaquan Burton, they've combined for over 300 yards receiving between the two of them. They're taking on a Southeast Louisiana team who scored just 7 points last week against the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. I'm going to lean toward Florida Atlantic against the spread. Next game, UAB taking on Liberty, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. UAB's -6, totals 50. Now, the Blazers put up 59 big points against Bama A&M in their opener. Running back Jermaine Brown had 114 yards on the ground, and he averaged nearly 12 yards a carry. Meanwhile, Lee Witherspoon averaged over 6.5 yards a carry and scored twice with his legs. They're taking on a Liberty team on the other side who barely snuck by Southern Miss. Actually took them overtime to beat them by 2 points. This porous Flames defense also allowed over 250 yards on the ground. Now, total-wise, Liberty saw their opener get over the number. They're also 6-2 to the over in their last 8. I'm going to lean toward Alabama Birmingham, UAB, the Blazers, -6, over 50. Next matchup, it is going to be Kent State taking on Oklahoma, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. The Oklahoma Sooners are -32, total 71. Now, the Sooners covered a 31-point spread last week against UTEP. Eric Gray rushed for 102 yards and averaged over 6 yards a carry. Meanwhile, D lineman Reggie Grimes, he had 2.5 sacks and 3 total tackles. They're taking on a Kent State team who allowed 45 points to Washington in a loss last week. They were catching 24 points and still failed to cover. The Golden Flashes also gave up 525 yards of total offense in the loss. And when it comes to the scoring, Kent State saw their opener against the Huskies get a couple of points above the number. They're actually 7-3 to the over in their last 10 outings, dating back to last season. I'm going to lean toward Oklahoma -32 and the over 71. Next ball game, little SEC action. I'm talking about Kentucky taking on Florida, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. The Florida Gators are -5.5, totals 52 and a hook. And even though the Gators had a huge game against Utah, the spot feels like a little bit of a trap. The Florida defense allowed 230 yards on the ground last week against Utah. Meanwhile, offensively, they were little threat throwing the football. They threw for under 170 yards against the Utes. They're taking on a stout UK defense who held Miami, Ohio to just 179 yards passing in their opener. And despite laying 16 points in that ball game, they comfortably won by 24. DeAndre Square led the charge with 7 tackles on the day. Meanwhile, quarterback Will Levis threw for 303 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, total-wise, the Wildcats saw their Week 1 contest fall under the number. Meanwhile, the Gators saw 3 out of their last 4 fall under the line, of course, dating back to last season. I'm going to lean toward the Kentucky Wildcats plus 5.5, keeping this one close, under 52 and a hook. The show is way too long. Next game, Central Arkansas, Ole Miss, 7 o'clock East. This game is off the board. Ole Miss beat up on Troy last week, 28-10. Kari Coleman had 8 tackles and a couple of sacks. Tysheem Johnson and Troy Brown combined for 23 tackles between the two of them. And even though the Rebels were not explosive offensively, running back Zach Evans rushed for 130 yards. Now they're taking on a Central Arkansas team who scored just 14 points against Missouri State last week. They lost 27-14 in that ball game. I'm going to lean toward Ole Miss getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, Syracuse, UConn, 7 o'clock East. The Syracuse Orange are minus 23, totals 49. And even though Syracuse stomped Louisville in the opener, it's going to be a tough spot to be in playing in front of a few thousand people in Connecticut. They actually could be a few hundred. They might not get 1,000 in attendance. So easy letdown spot here. The Huskies on the other side, they covered a 21-point spread in their most recent contest this past week. UConn's actually 2-0 against the spread on the year. Nathan Carter's rushed for 313 yards through 2 ball games. He's averaging over 7 yards a carry. Meanwhile, defensively, Jackson Mitchell's leading the charge with 23 tackles on the year. When it comes to the total, UConn's 2-0 to the under thus far in the season. Meanwhile, Syracuse saw their opener fall under the total. I'm going to lean toward UConn plus 23, under 49. Next ball game, Western Carolina taking on Georgia Tech, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, this game's currently off the board. The Yellow Jackets, they don't look great. They scored only 10 points against Clemson, and they failed to cover a massive 24-point spread. Definitely an attainable number in a conference ball game. Jeff Sims, he threw for just 164 yards. Of course, he had an interception. Meanwhile, the Yellow Jackets' leading rusher had just 41 yards on the ground. They're taking on a Western Carolina team who put up 52 against Charlotte. Not Charlotte. Charleston Southern last week. I'm going to lean toward Western Carolina, keeping it close and covering the number. Next game, UMass Toledo, 7 o'clock East. Toledo's minus 28.5, totals 49. And even though the Rockets put a hurting on LIU, they failed to cover the point spread in that game. They're taking on a UMass squad who had a tough one against Tulane. But they actually did play some pretty good pass defense. They held the Green Wave to under 175 yards passing in that contest. Meanwhile, offensively, the Minutemen rushed for 200 yards on the ground. Now, total-wise, both teams saw their openers fall under the number. Give me UMass plus 28.5, under 49. Next game, Weber State taking on Utah State, 7 o'clock East. This game's currently off the board. Now, Utah State had a pitiful performance last week against Alabama. They lost 55-0 and failed to cover a 42-point spread. Meanwhile, in Week 0, the Aggies failed to cover against the likes of UConn. Utah State's leading receiver has just 111 yards through 2 ball games. They're taking on a Weber State school who beat up on some team called Western Oregon 41-5. Give me Weber State keeping this one close and covering the number. Next ball game, Akron State taking on Tulane, 7 o'clock East. No line for this game. Now, Tulane beat the brakes off of UMass in their opener this past Saturday. They won 42-10 and forced 3 interceptions in the ball game. They're also led by Dorian Williams, who had double-digit tackles on the day. They're taking on an Alcorn team who allowed 31 points to Stephen F. Austin this past Saturday. They lost 31-27 in that ball game. I'm going to lean toward Tulane getting the job done against the number. Next game, Lamar, SMU, 7 o'clock East. No line. SMU easily covered a 9-point spread and beat the hell out of North Texas 48-10 last Saturday. Tanner Mordecai threw for 432 yards and 4 touchdowns. Meanwhile, 100-yard receivers Rashee Rice and Jordan Curley combined for nearly 270 receiving yards between the two of them. They're taking on a Lamar school who scored just 14 points against Abilene Christian last week. They lost 28-14 in that Thursday night opener. I'm going to lean toward SMU getting the job done against the spread. Next contest I have for you. It is going to be Howard taking on South Florida, 7 o'clock East. This game's currently off the board. Now, USF was extremely uncompetitive with BYU in the opener. They lost 50-21 and came nowhere near covering the 10.5. And aside from some piss-poor defense, the Bulls threw for just 172 yards, and their leading rusher gained only 39 on the ground. Now, they're taking on a Howard team who competed hard in their first 2 games this year. They held Alabama A&M to just 23 points in their opener. They also put up 28 points against Hampton in a 1-score game. Very competitive. So I think Howard can keep it close. I think it's going to be a significant number here. Give me Howard catching the points. I think they're going to be catching points. Give me Howard getting the job done against the spread. Next contest, it is going to be Northern Illinois taking on Tulsa, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Now, Tulsa's -6 with the total at 62. Now, I know this doesn't seem like a very interesting game, but this game's being featured as another one of my college football tier package bets on my website. So if you want to see whether I'm betting on the side or the total on this one, there's only one way to find out, and that's to sign up using the link in the description section below. Once again, that's my college football tier package bets. Next game, Eastern Michigan taking on Louisiana, 7 o'clock East. The Ragin' Cajuns are -11.5, totals 56. Now, the Cajuns are back to playing some really tough defense. They limited Southeast Louisiana to just 149 passing yards Saturday. They also forced 2 interceptions in the secondary. Now, Cam Pettisclo and Courtline Flowers, they combined for 12 tackles for Louisiana. They're taking on an Eastern Michigan squad who failed to cover against Eastern Kentucky in the opener. They actually gave up 34 points to the FCS school. And even worse, the Colonels threw for over 350 yards against this Eagle defense. Now, total-wise, the Cajuns did see their opener fall about 30 points below the posted total. Matter of fact, 3 out of their last 4 fell under the line dating back to last year. I'm going to lean toward the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns, -11.5, under 56. Next contest, it is going to be Alabama A&M taking on Troy, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. No line posted for this game yet. Now, Troy covered the number against Ole Miss in their opener. Carlton Marshall and T.J. Harris, they combined for 21 total tackles. Meanwhile, quarterback Gunnar Watson completed over 72% of his passes for 275 yards. Now, they're taking on an Alabama A&M team who was destroyed by UAB 59-0. I don't care what this number ends up at. I think Troy should be able to take care of it. I'm going to lean toward Troy getting the job done against the spread. Next game, Florida International taking on Texas State, 7 o'clock Eastern kickoff. Texas State is minus 14, total 60.5. Now, for some reason, Texas State was favored last week against Nevada, and they got crushed. They allowed 38 points to the Wolfpack and made 0 attempt to establish a run game. Matter of fact, the Bobcats' leading rusher ran for just 16 total yards. Now, they're taking on an FIU team who had little problems passing the football last week. They threw for 310 yards against Bryant, along with 5 touchdowns. When it comes to the total, both schools saw their openers get over the number. I'm going to lean toward FIU plus 14 and the over 60.5. All right, guys, I'm going to take my next and final break for the video. Give me a couple minutes. Got to stretch out the legs, get a little water, and I'll be back in just a second. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for letting me do this. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks for bearing with me here. Thank you, guys. Alrighty, guys, let's get the job done here. Let's finish out strong. Appreciate you, giving me that time out there to stretch my legs, walk around a little bit. Hopefully, you were able to fast forward and you didn't have to watch a blank screen. But anyway, let's go ahead and finish it off. We're going to take a look at Stephen F. Austin taking on Louisiana Tech, 7 o'clock East. No line set for this game. La Tech should be able to bounce back here against Stephen F. Austin. They had a tough opener against Missouri, but they did show a little life offensively. The Bulldogs threw for over 336 yards and 3 touchdowns. Meanwhile, wide receivers Cyrus Allen and Griffin Hebert, they combined for over 210 receiving yards and 3 scores. Now they're taking on a Stephen F. Austin team who allowed nearly 70 points already in 2 games. I'm going to lean toward La Tech getting the job done against the spread. Next matchup, Arizona State taking on Oklahoma State. 7:30 Eastern kickoff. Should be a pretty good game here, at least on paper. Oklahoma State's minus 11, totals 58. Now the Cowboys failed to cover a double-digit point spread last week to Central Michigan. They also gave up a staggering 44 points in that game. The Cowboys let the Chippewas throw for over 420 yards against them in the opener. They're taking on an Arizona State team who definitely took care of business in their opener themselves. They put up 40 on Northern Arizona. en route to a 37-point victory. Now, the Sun Devils rushed for over 265 yards. Xavier Valade averaged nearly 8 yards a carry, and he also scored 2 times on the ground. Meanwhile, defensively, Merlin Robertson had 11 tackles on the day. Now, when it comes to the total, the Sun Devils did see their opener fall about 10 points below the line. Matter of fact, Arizona State saw 6 out of their last 7 fall under the total dating back to last year. I'm going to lean toward Arizona State plus 11 and the under 58. Next matchup. It is going to be USC taking on Stanford, 7:30 p.m. East. The USC Trojans are -9, total 67.5. And even though USC's destroyed Rice in the opener, this is a conference rivalry game on the road. The Trojans have also had a tough time covering the number against the Pac-12 here recently. They failed to cover in 6 out of their last 7 conference ball games. They're taking on a Stanford club who simply did what they had to do and crush Colgate 41-10. Can't really control who's on your schedule. Well, I guess the coaches can, but the players can't. Levani Damuni, he had double-digit tackles for Stanford in that 31-point win. Meanwhile, quarterback Tanner McKee went 22 of 27 for 308 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Now, total-wise, Stanford saw unders in 6 out of their last 10 ball games. Meanwhile, USC held Rice to just 14 points in their opener. I'm going to lean towards Stanford plus 9, under 67.5. Next ball game, San Jose State taking on Auburn, 7:30 p.m. East. Auburn's -23, totals 50 and a hook. Now, the Tigers failed to cover a big spread last week against Mercer. They were laying 30 and failed to cover that number. The Tigers also failed to cover in 5 out of their last 6 ball games. They're taking on a San Jose State team who can be pretty tough defensively. The Spartans forced 3 turnovers in their opener. And they were led by linebacker Kyle Harmon, who had 11 tackles. Now, offensively, wide receiver Elijah Cooks had 123 yards and averaged just about 21 yards a catch. When it comes to the total, San Jose State saw their opener fall 13 points below the number. Meanwhile, this Auburn program saw unders in 7 out of their last 10. I'm going to lean towards San Jose State plus 23, under 50 and a hook. Next game, Southern University taking on LSU, 7:30 p.m. East. This game's off the board. Despite the Tigers' shocking loss to Florida State last week, their defense did their best to keep them in that game. They did a good job in many different areas. Guys, don't fall victim to the hype. I know a lot of you guys are on social media. Everybody's shitting on Brian Kelly. He's a great coach. He's going to have these guys prepared. Literally his first game in the purple and yellow. He's going to have these guys prepared. They're going to beat the shit out of these guys. Jay Ward and Major Burns, they combined for 16 total tackles last week. Give me LSU by 1,000,000. I don't care what the number is. They're going to cover it. Next game, Georgia Southern, Nebraska, 7:30 p.m. East. Nebraska's -24, total 63. But despite being favored by a bunch, the Cornhuskers failed to cover double-digit spreads twice already this year. This Cornhusker defense is also ranked 101st in the nation in stopping the run. They're taking on a Georgia Southern team who walloped Morgan State in their opener. They threw for 367 yards and 4 touchdowns. Meanwhile, the Georgia Southern ground game ran it into the end zone 4 times. Now, total-wise, the Eagles' opener with Morgan State went 13 points above the line. Meanwhile, Nebraska saw 6 out of their last 9 get over the total themselves. I'm going to lean toward Georgia Southern plus 24, over 63. Next ball game, Texas Southern taking on Northern Texas, 7:30 p.m. East. I'm sorry, it's just North Texas. It's not Northern. It's just North Texas. Anyway, that game's off the board. And even though the Mean Green of North Texas got shellacked by SMU this past week, they're still the better team in this one. Austin Annie has thrown for 422 yards in a couple of games this year. He's been sacked only once. Meanwhile, KD Davis leads the charge with 15 total tackles. And just remember, guys, they beat up UTEP in their Week 0 opener this year. They're taking on a Texan Southern squad who gave up 40 to Prairie View in a loss. Give me North Texas covering. Next game, McNeese State taking on Rice, 7:30 p.m. East. This game's off the board. Rice allowed 66 points to USC and failed to cover a 32-point spread. McNeese will keep it close. Give me them. McNeese State plus the points. Next game, Hawaii, Michigan, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. Michigan is minus 51, total 67.5. The Wolverines took care of a 31-point spread last week against Colorado State. Now, the Wolverines rushed for over 230 yards and had 440 total yards of offense. Meanwhile, defensively, Michigan had 7 sacks, and they were led by Junior Colson, who had double-digit tackles. Now, they're taking on a Hawaii team who's 127th in the country in rush defense. They've also allowed 112 points in just 2 ball games. I'm going to lean toward Michigan minus 51 and the over 67.5. Next ball game, Tarleton State taking on TCU, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. No line currently posted for this game. Now, TCU's coming off a solid 38-13 victory over Colorado, where they actually rushed for 275 yards. Meanwhile, defensively, Nnamdi Obiazer and Jamoy Hodge, they combined for double-digit tackles. I'm going to lean toward TCU getting the job done against the number. Next contest, Idaho taking on Indiana, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. This game's currently off the board. Now, Indiana beat Illinois in their season opener, and they covered the point spread. They also played some really good defense. Cam Jones had a dozen tackles from that linebacker spot and a sack. Meanwhile, quarterback Connor Bazelak threw for 330 yards and was sacked only once. I'm going to lean toward Indiana getting the job done against the spread. Next ball game, little ACC action. I'm talking about BC taking on Virginia Tech, 8 o'clock East. Virginia Tech's minus 3, totals 46. Now, the Hokies lost to Boston College last season 17-3. They also continue to struggle offensively this year. The Hokies scored just 17 points against Old Dominion in an outright loss. Grant Wells threw for just 193 yards and 4 interceptions. Now, Tech's leading receiver had just 49 total yards as well. They're taking on a Boston College squad who played some pretty tough defense in their opener themselves. They held Rutgers to just 110 yards passing despite their loss. Donovan Ezereku and Vinny DePalma, they combined for 18 total tackles. Now, offensively, even though they didn't score a bunch, they had little issue throwing the football. Phil Yurkovich, he threw for over 280 yards and 3 touchdowns. He looks very healthy this year following an injury. Meanwhile, wideout Zay Flowers, he had 10 catches for $117 and 2 scores. Now, total-wise, both teams saw their openers fall under the number. As a matter of fact, Boston College has gone 8-1 to the under in their last 9. I'm going to lean toward BC plus 3, under 46. Next ball game, Idaho State taking on San Diego State, 8 o'clock Eastern kickoff. This game's currently off the board. Now, the Aztecs were favored by 6 last week, and they lost by 28 to Arizona. San Diego State threw for a pitiful 62 yards in the game, and their leading rusher gained only 39 yards. I'm going to lean toward Idaho State plus the points. Next matchup, Nicholls State taking on UL Monroe, 8 o'clock Eastern start time. This matchup's currently off the board. UL Monroe got crushed by Texas 52-10. They threw it for just $167, and their leading rusher had just 39 yards. I'm going to lean toward Nicholls State covering the number. Next game, Eastern Washington taking on Oregon, 8:30 p.m. East. Now, this matchup is currently off the board. Eastern Washington is going to be catching a whole bunch of points in this one. Meanwhile, Oregon is coming off a disgraceful 49-3 loss to UGA. That's Georgia. Not competitive, had no shot. The Ducks threw it for just $173 and had 2 interceptions. Their leading receiver also had just 37 yards. I'm going to lean toward Eastern Washington, the Cooper Cups, plus the points. Next game, New Mexico State taking on UTEP, 9 o'clock Eastern start time. UTEP's minus 14, totals 46. Now, this is just way too many points to be laying for UTEP. They're 0-2 on the season already, and they failed to cover in both of those losses. The Miners are also averaging just 13 points a game. Their leading rusher has only 75 yards in 2 contests. Meanwhile, defensively, the Miners have allowed 76 points already. They're taking on a New Mexico State team who's equally as bad, but they're catching 2 scores. Give me New Mexico State plus 14, under 46. Next game, Baylor, BYU, 10-15 East. The BYU Cougars are minus 3, totals 53.5. Now, BYU did beat the brakes off of USF in their opener, although they did allow 21 points. They're taking on a Baylor team who amassed over 570 yards of total offense and averaged over 6 yards a carry. Total-wise, both squads saw their season openers get over the posted number. I think Baylor has way more talent. Give me Baylor plus 3, over 53.5. Next game, Oregon State, Fresno State, 10:30 p.m. East. Now, Oregon State's minus 1 on the road, total 61 and a hook. Now, I think the X factor in this game is Fresno State quarterback Jake Haener. He's thrown for 377 yards, and he's had a 100-yard receiver in Nico Remigio in the opener. Nico had 9 catches and averaged over 11 yards per reception. Meanwhile, defensively, Evan Williams leads the charge with 9 total tackles. I like Fresno in this spot here. I'm going to lean toward the Bulldogs plus 1 in the over 61.5. With that, guys, we're going to jump into our next and final matchup for the video. It is going to be Mississippi State taking on Arizona, 11 o'clock Eastern start time. Mississippi State is minus 10, total 60. Now, I'm definitely leaning toward the over in this one. And if you want to see whether I'm taking the Bulldogs in a late game on the road here, or if I like Arizona catching double digits at home, there's only one way to find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. This is one of my personal selections. But as far as making a free pick goes, I'm going to lean toward the over 60 in that game. And with that, guys, we're going to jump into our quick pick recap. I like Louisville plus 7, under 61.5. New Mexico plus 17, under 44 and a hook. I like the under 64.5 in the Alabama-Texas game. If you want to know who I'm picking to cover the spread, you got to sign up for my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. I like Arkansas State plus 44, over 68. Miami Hurricanes minus 26, over 55. Arkansas minus 9, under 53. Wake Forest minus 10, over 64. Missouri plus 8, under 57. Give me Minnesota getting the job done against the spread. Duke plus 9.5, over 58. Ohio Bobcats plus 25, over 54. North Carolina Tar Heels minus 7, over 57. Army plus 2, over 56. NC State getting the job done against the spread. Central Michigan minus 4.5, over 59. Utah against the spread. Lafayette against the number. Ball State plus 7, over 52.5. Give me Marshall plus 21, under 51 and a hook. I like Clemson getting the job done against the spread. Appalachian State plus 18, over 52.5. Tennessee Volunteers minus 6.5, over 66. Washington State plus 17, under 49 and a hook. Give me Cincinnati getting the job done against the number. Colorado plus 16.5 over 45. Memphis minus 6 under 51. Maryland Terrapins minus 27 over 65. I'm going to lean toward the Georgia Bulldogs getting the job done and covering the point spread. Give me Michigan State minus 34.5 over 56. Texas Tech minus 3 over 65.5. UNLV plus 13 over 49. I also like the Washington Huskies getting the job done against the spread. I like the Iowa Hawkeyes minus 3 under 40.5. Virginia Cavaliers plus 4.5 under 57 and a hook. Give me Purdue against the spread. Rutgers against the number. Wyoming covering the point spread as well. I like Eastern Kentucky getting the job done against the spread. James Madison covering the number. Middle Tennessee State plus 8 under 58.5. Give me UCLA getting the job done against the spread. Kansas plus 14 under 59. Old Dominion plus 13 under 51.5. I like Buffalo against the spread. Miami, Ohio against the number. Coastal Carolina covering the spread. Florida Atlantic covering the number as well. UAB minus 6 over 50. Oklahoma minus 32 over 71. University of Kentucky plus 5.5 under 52 and a hook. Give me Ole Miss getting the job done against the spread. UConn plus 23 under 49. Western Carolina getting the job done against the number. UMass plus 28.5 under 49. Weber State against the spread. Tulane against the number. SMU covering the point spread. Howard keeping it close and covering the number. Now, I have no free pick available for the Northern Illinois-Tulsa game. That's another one of those games that I'm betting on personally. So if you want to know whether I'm betting on the side and the total, only one way to find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on my website. I like the Raging Cajuns, Louisiana minus 11.5 under 56. Troy against the spread, FIU plus 14 over 60.5. Louisiana Tech against the number, Arizona State plus 11 under 58.5. I like Stanford plus 9 under 67 and a hook. San Jose State plus 23 under 50.5. LSU getting the job done against the number. Georgia Southern plus 24 over 63. North Texas against the spread. McNeese State against the number. Michigan minus 51 over 67.5. TCU covering the spread. Indiana covering the number. Boston College plus 3 under 46. I'm leaning toward Idaho State covering the point spread, keeping that one close. Nicholls State against the spread. Eastern Washington against the number. New Mexico State plus 14 under 46. Baylor plus 3 over 53.5. Fresno State plus 1 over 61 and a hook. And with my next and final free pick for the video, I'm going to lean toward the over 60 in the Mississippi State-Arizona game. And if you want to find out which side I'm betting on, whether I like Mississippi State laying the points or if I like Arizona catching double digits at home, only one way to find out, and that's to sign up for my college football tier package bets on patreon.com/BrockPage. And with that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Thank God. Whew, that is a long video. The college football video is brutal. A lot of research, a lot of time, a lot of sitting, a lot of talking. But we are done. We got through it, guys. I appreciate you sticking with me. Guys, real quick, got to remind you to check me out on my website at patreon.com/BrockPage. Now, guys, if you do end up getting a membership here today, you're going to get access to that content every single day, all the way through the end of the month, all the way until October 1st. I always tell folks in every single video, the earlier in the month you sign up, the better. And guys, if you want to get access to every single bet, every single package, every single day, you're going to want to sign up for my board member package. Not only do board members get access to the board member tier package bet itself, they also get access to every single bet, every single package, every single day, all the way until October 1st. It's an all-inclusive membership. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. With that said, guys, happy week 2. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at patreon.com/rockpage.